It didn't begin with a headline. It began with a whisper, one that slid through legal circles like a cold draft under a locked door. A sealed court document had just been filed in the Southern District of New York. The name listed on the defendant line, Donald J. Trump. But this wasn't like the others. No grand jury announcement, no televised walk-up to the courtroom, no leak from the usual suspects. This one came from inside, from a name no one expected, from someone who once sat at Trump's right hand. The charges? Sealed. For now. The source? A former ally turned adversary. The timing? Devastating. By noon, legal experts were already calling it a ticking time bomb. By nightfall, the former president was back on stage at Mar-a-Lago, visibly rattled, audibly furious. And this time, the gloves weren't just off. They were buried. It hit the docket just before sunrise, 5:46 a.m. Eastern Time. Clerks at the U.S. District Court barely had their coffee when the filing lit up their monitors. A federal lawsuit titled United States vs. Trump, sealed motion, classified supplement attached. No fanfare, no press release, just a line of cold legal code wrapped in redaction tape. But someone saw it, and someone leaked it. By 7:12 a.m., #Trump lawsuit was trending on Twitter. By 8 o'clock, CNN had cut from weather to a breaking banner. Trump faces new legal shock. Details sealed, but sources call it explosive. At first, the usual suspects rolled their eyes. Another case, another witch hunt, another politically motivated ambush. Until they saw the name attached to the complaint. Eli Walsh, not a prosecutor, not a political rival, but a former senior advisor. Trump's own White House general counsel from 2018 to 2020. The man who once drafted his executive orders. The man who once defended him before Congress. Now the man trying to bring him down. In the suit, Walsh accused Trump of orchestrating a covert influence scheme that blurred the line between campaign finance, judicial interference, and constitutional abuse. The language wasn't just legal, it was surgical. He alleged that in the final months of the presidency, Trump directed staff to funnel discretionary federal funds through shell nonprofits to pressure federal judges and reshape judicial attitudes through covert channels. In layman's terms, he wasn't just stacking the courts, he was allegedly buying their silence. Within hours, MSNBC had convened a 6-panel discussion, 3 of whom were former federal prosecutors. Fox News aired back-to-back segments titled Desperation at Dawn and The Deep State's Last Stand. Even Newsmax issued a statement. If these allegations are true, we are entering constitutional collapse territory. The court, meanwhile, remained quiet. Judge Miriam Decker, an Obama appointee with a reputation for not flinching, issued a protective order. No public disclosure, the ruling read, until such time as the court determines the national security implications of the supplemental evidence. National security? That's when even the skeptical voices started whispering. The lawsuit didn't just reference shady payments or back-channel communications. It referenced a memo, a 7-page internal directive codenamed Echo Protocol, authored during Trump's final days in office. Its contents remain sealed. But Walsh's suit claims it included operational plans to influence judicial assignments through administrative reshuffling, with the alleged intent of shielding Trump from future legal exposure. The kind of scheme, one legal analyst said, that sounds like something out of a Tom Clancy novel, only with subpoenas instead of spy drones. By noon, Mar-a-Lago had gone into media lockdown. Trump's press office issued a fiery, all-caps statement calling the lawsuit a baseless, un-American attack by a failed lawyer seeking book deals. But inside the resort, sources said the mood had changed. Phones buzzed with missed calls from lawyers. Donors quietly asked for refunds. And Trump himself? Spotted in the hallway, jaw tight, papers in hand, silent. No rallies were scheduled. No Truth Social rants were posted. Something was different. This wasn't just another headline. It was something else, something quieter, something deeper. It was a trap door, and it had just opened beneath him. Eli Walsh wasn't supposed to be the one who turned. To those inside Trump's inner orbit, Walsh was the velvet hammer, soft-spoken, surgical with words, and fiercely loyal. He didn't do cable hits. He didn't write memoirs. He drafted policy memos that reshaped immigration law and executive authority, and did so without flinching. But something shifted in the final months of the administration. It started, reportedly, with a meeting in the Oval Office in December 2020. Walsh had been summoned late in the evening, alongside 2 other senior advisors. On the desk, a folder marked Echo Protocol Internal Eyes Only. Inside, according to Walsh's later affidavit, were detailed proposals on how to leverage administrative control over judicial logistics, from courtroom funding to calendar manipulation, all framed under the guise of executive efficiency. The proposal didn't carry Trump's handwriting, but the initials in the margin, DJT, were unmistakable. Walsh objected, not publicly, not immediately, but internally. He raised concerns in a private email to then Chief of Staff Mark Meadows, flagged the legal boundaries, even suggested a DOJ advisory review. Nothing happened. 2 weeks later, a memo was signed, not by Trump directly, but by a mid-level legal aide operating under White House authority, greenlighting limited administrative exploration of judicial resourcing. In short, the plan was moving forward. And Walsh? He was boxed out. He stayed quiet for months, until January 6th. The Capitol riot wasn't the catalyst. It was the confirmation. Walsh, according to his own testimony, began compiling his documentation the next morning. He wasn't interested in writing a tell-all. He was preparing an insurance policy, and on the morning of the lawsuit filing, that policy came due. Legal analysts were stunned. Walsh's complaint wasn't sloppy. It wasn't partisan. It was meticulously constructed. 74 pages of internal correspondence, footnoted timelines, and signed authorizations. Even conservative legal scholars admitted this isn't noise, this is a scalpel. But the question remained, why now? Some speculated the DOJ had approached him as a cooperating witness. Others whispered about a closed-door ethics panel that had threatened disbarment. But those closest to Walsh said the truth was simpler. He believed the judiciary was being turned into a branch office of Mar-a-Lago, and he couldn't let that happen. "I drafted executive orders," Walsh would later say during a televised hearing. "I know the language, and I saw what they were doing. They weren't building policy, they were building armor." The armor, it turned out, had a name, Echo Protocol. The memo that would soon be known as the Trigger document wasn't stored in a secure vault or shredded before departure. It was emailed, CCD, flagged as time-sensitive. Walsh had printed a copy. He kept it locked in a private safe in his Georgetown condo, beneath old campaign folders and a half-used copy of the Mueller report. 7 pages, double-spaced, header stamped, confidential internal executive directive. At first glance, it read like administrative gibberish, timelines, workflow allocations, budgeting structures, but beneath the dry language was a blueprint, not for policy, for power. The memo, as outlined in Walsh's filing, detailed a proposal for a unified judicial operations strategy. Its purpose? To streamline judicial resourcing and procedural calendars under an executive-aligned efficiency board. In practice, a proxy command center housed within the Office of Management and Budget. Buried in the footnotes, language suggesting oversight capabilities tied directly to the executive office of the president. In other words, Trump. The strategy would give the executive unprecedented visibility into court operations, including caseloads, scheduling delays, and even judicial reassignment criteria. One line stood out. Influence must be exercised not through judgment, but through friction. Logistical drag can shape outcomes as effectively as ruling. Legal scholars went pale. "This isn't administrative policy," said one former appellate judge. "This is a judicial sabotage dressed in a three-piece suit." And then came the redacted sections. According to Walsh, 3 paragraphs had been blacked out in the official archives, likely classified by a White House security officer in Trump's final hours. He claimed to have seen the unredacted version. It referenced coordination with 3 unnamed individuals connected to judicial ethics panels. One of them, he alleged, had received undisclosed funding from a donor-advised fund linked to a Trump-affiliated PAC. This wasn't a rogue memo. It was a roadmap, a plan to co-opt the judiciary, not with bullets or ballots, but with bureaucracy. When excerpts were leaked to the Washington Post, panic followed. Senator Sheldon Whitehouse called an emergency Judiciary Committee session. MSNBC aired a segment titled "The Most Dangerous Document Since Watergate." Even the Wall Street Journal ran a piece cautiously titled "Operational Overreach or Constitutional Crisis." The DOJ refused to comment. But inside legal circles, the debate was over. The trigger document wasn't just incriminating. It was the bridge between executive power and judicial manipulation. And Trump? He didn't deny its existence. He called it a standard efficiency memo. But when pressed by reporters about who wrote it, he paused. "I don't remember," he said. "I see a lot of papers." Then he turned, walked off the podium, and didn't take another question. By the time the trigger document had made its way into public view, albeit in excerpts and euphemisms, Trump's silence had become suffocating. He hadn't posted on Truth Social in 36 hours, no interviews, no press calls, not even a quick witch hunt remark from a golf cart. That changed at 6 p.m. sharp, Eastern Time. The Mar-a-Lago ballroom, usually decked for fundraisers and faux gilded galas, had been repurposed into a press war room. American flags flanked a black podium. Behind it, a massive screen displayed only one phrase: "Real Americans deserve the truth." And then he walked out. No music, no delay. Donald J. Trump approached the mic with the weight of 20 lawsuits and the fury of a man who believed every one of them was a hit job. "This is the most disgusting political setup in American history," he began, voice lower than usual, doyenty, too low, almost calm. "They can't beat me at the ballot box, so they're trying to bury me in fake lawsuits and garbage paper trails from rats like Eli Walsh." He paused for emphasis, scanning the room like a boxer measuring a crowd before a title fight. "They call it Echo Protocol. I call it efficient government. I call it cutting waste and fighting corruption in the courts. You remember the courts? The ones who've been trying to take me out since 2016? The crowd, stacked with loyal donors and hand-picked media, roared on cue. "This memo they're screaming about, I've never even seen it. And if someone wrote it, good, because the judiciary in this country has become a rogue force." Then he leaned forward, lips curled in that familiar smirk. "They're not afraid of me, they're afraid of you, of your votes, of your voices, and now they're using a disgruntled former staffer to wage lawfare on behalf of the deep state." Trump didn't just reject the lawsuit. He detonated it, calling the allegations treasonous, calling Walsh a two-faced beltway insect, and threatening to countersue every single person involved in this political operation. Within minutes, the headlines lit up like a slot machine. Trump unleashes on ex-advisor in explosive response. Fox News, Trump threatens legal counterstrike over memo leak. The Hill, Trump denies Echo Protocol, calls judiciary rogue. CNN. But it wasn't just the words, it was the fire behind them. the edge in his voice that suggested not just anger, but fear. Because behind the defiance, the podium, the red tie, and raised fist, Trump knew something he wasn't saying. Judge Miriam Decker had already denied his team's emergency motion to dismiss the case. And worse, she had scheduled the first pre-hearing review for 48 hours later. That meant the lawsuit wasn't going away. It was getting a hearing in a real courtroom, with real discovery and real consequences. Trump ended the press conference with a jab aimed straight at the Constitution itself. They think the courts can stop me. They've forgotten who the people are. They've forgotten who the real power belongs to. Then he walked off stage, no questions, flanked by lawyers with tight faces and tighter briefcases. It was no longer a legal drama. It was a constitutional confrontation. And the fuse was lit. The morning of the hearing, the courthouse steps looked like the set of a political thriller. Reporters elbowed for position. Barricades lined the perimeter. Helicopters hovered low, drowning out murmurs of legal speculation with rotors of war. At 9 a.m. sharp, the doors opened, and for the first time in history, a former U.S. president's internal policy memo was at the center of a federal civil suit alleging judicial corruption. Judge Decker presided from the bench like a woman carved from stone. She'd ruled over terrorism cases, RICO trials, and multi-billion-dollar corporate fraud. But never this. Trump's legal team came in swinging, armed with objections, delay motions, and 2 former DOJ officials now serving as defense counsel. Their argument? The lawsuit was meritless. The trigger document was unofficial. Walsh had violated executive privilege by disclosing it. Decker listened, stone-faced. Then came the prosecution. Walsh's attorneys were lean, methodical. They didn't grandstand. They placed Exhibit 7A, a redacted section of the Echo memo, on the screen. The line that drew gasps? Judicial order must align with executive continuity in times of transition. Translation? Alleged manipulation of court assignments to cushion Trump's post-presidency legal exposure. Decker asked only one question. Is the author of this document present in the courtroom today? Silence. Trump didn't flinch, but his lead counsel, Peter Langford, rose instantly. Your Honor, we assert the President never saw or approved this document. Attribution is speculative at best and defamatory at worst. Decker nodded slowly. Noted. Then we'll determine authorship through deposition. The courtroom stilled. That one word, deposition, dropped like a thunderclap. It meant testimony. It meant documents. It meant Mar-a-Lago was no longer a sanctuary. It was evidence. By lunch, social media had erupted. #deposed Trump was trending on X. MSNBC played the clip on loop. Fox anchors fumbled to reframe, "This is just procedural. Nothing to see here." But inside the courtroom, the narrative had shifted. This wasn't a leak. It wasn't a memo. It was now a legal battlefield. And in the gallery, as photographers clicked and analysts whispered, a new image emerged. Trump, not as the kingmaker of the judiciary, but as its defendant. Chief Justice John Roberts had remained silent through dozens of political firestorms, through impeachments, insurrections, and viral pressers. He believed in tradition, in temperance, in letting the court speak only through its rulings. But the Echo Protocol was different. It didn't just challenge court decisions. It challenged the court's right to exist independently. The memo's language, judicial order must align with executive continuity, hit too close to a theory Roberts had spent decades refuting, the unitary executive. And this time, the threat wasn't abstract. It was in a courtroom, attached to a live, active lawsuit. So, on a crisp Monday morning, the Supreme Court's official site published a 3-paragraph statement from the Chief Justice himself. his first public rebuke since the January 6th aftermath. The statement read, in part, "The judiciary is not an arm of the executive. It does not answer to political will, partisan strategy, or campaign cycles. Our independence is not a courtesy granted by presidents. It is the foundation of constitutional balance. Any effort, covert or overt, to subordinate judicial administration to executive power is not reform. It is erosion, and it will be met with institutional resistance." Legal scholars gasped. CNN's legal correspondent paused mid-sentence on air. Even C-SPAN anchors broke protocol to admit this is unprecedented. But perhaps more stunning was what came next. Justice Sonia Sotomayor released a rare joint endorsement of Roberts' statement. And within hours, so did Justice Amy Coney Barrett. The court, often fractured along ideological lines, had presented a unified front. The message was clear: touch the judiciary, and the Constitution bleeds. At a White House press briefing, the press secretary dodged questions about whether the administration endorsed the statement. At Mar-a-Lago, Trump dismissed it as grandstanding from the ivory tower. But inside conservative legal circles, alarm bells were ringing. Because this wasn't just public backlash. This was the judiciary defending itself with clarity, unity, and teeth. And if Roberts was speaking now, it meant he wasn't just worried. He was preparing for battle. Just when the media frenzy had begun to settle into narrative grooves, Trump versus Walsh, Roberts versus encroachment, a deeper thread began to unravel. It started with a cryptic tweet from a cybersecurity researcher based in Zurich. If the ECHO protocol was built on foreign code, this isn't just a court scandal, it's counter-intel. Tick-tock. At first, no one paid attention. Then The Guardian published a piece linking Walsh's court filings to a series of metadata tags found in the leaked trigger document, tags that traced back to a contracted server in Budapest. Suddenly, what had been a civil lawsuit began to look like an international operation, and buried deep in Appendix C of Walsh's filing was the smoking gun, a series of encrypted emails between a Trump campaign legal advisor and a foreign data firm. The subject lines? Judicial architecture draft, ECHO sync protocols, suggested optimization, EU interference case model. The emails were vague, scrubbed clean of sensitive language. But one stood out. Dated November 4, 2020, one day after the election, it read, "Confirming alignment. Operational delays in district court transitions are achievable with resource pivot. Coordination with partner nodes proceeding." Legal experts translated that into plain English. Foreign influence operations may have played a role in the very design of the ECHO protocol. Walsh's team submitted this information under seal. But the leak was out. And by the end of the day, the FBI issued a public confirmation. "We are reviewing communications referenced in the ECHO protocol case for potential national security implications." That sentence, just 17 words, changed everything. The story was no longer about one lawsuit. It was about a former president, a covert administrative strategy, and a possible link to foreign digital infrastructure with past ties to misinformation networks. National Security Council officials reportedly called an emergency interagency meeting. 2 congressional committees launched joint inquiries, and CNN rebranded their nightly special to The ECHO Scandal: What Did Trump Know, and Who Helped Him Build It? Inside Trump world, the spin machine went into overdrive. Steve Bannon called it a globalist fiction novel. Laura Ingraham suggested it was a CIA distraction. Fox News ran a segment titled Bureaucratic Hysteria or Real Threat. But quietly, even longtime Trump loyalists were backing away. Donors paused payments, surrogates went silent, and aides stopped appearing on morning shows. Because once national security enters the frame, the narrative shifts. It's no longer about politics. It's about exposure. And the question was no longer, did Trump know? It was, who else did? He had been absent from the headlines for nearly 2 weeks, a silence that for Stephen Miller was more unsettling than any controversy. But when the Echo Protocol threatened to fracture the conservative legal foundation Trump had built, Miller emerged like a shadow re-entering the frame. At a hastily assembled Heritage Summit, standing before an LED screen ablaze with American flags and phrases like "judicial reform now," Miller took the stage. "This lawsuit," he began, voice coiled like barbed wire, "is not about justice, it's about revenge. It's about crippling one man because he dared to challenge the corrupt consensus. He pivoted to his signature strategy, reframing sabotage as salvation. Echo Protocol wasn't sabotage, it was streamlining. It wasn't subversion, it was modernization." Then came the twist. Miller wasn't just defending the memo, he was expanding it. He unveiled what he called Echo 2.0, a proposed legislative package that would place judicial administrative functions fully under the purview of Congress and the executive branch. "Judges shouldn't control their own fiefdoms," he said. "No one gets to build an empire behind black robes." The proposal was dead on arrival legislatively, but the message was the real payload. Miller was taking the attack national. He called for a grassroots movement to reclaim judicial logistics. He even coined a new rally phrase, "drain the courts." But then something unexpected happened. During a live panel later that evening, a Republican senator, long seen as a Trump ally, was asked about Echo 2.0. He hesitated, then answered plainly, "I can't support a plan that puts judges under political management. That's not conservative. That's authoritarian." The studio froze. So did the segment producer. It was a crack in the armor. A sign that even inside the GOP, there were limits. Within hours, clips of the exchange flooded Twitter, Reddit, and YouTube. The right was splitting, and the center was watching. Miller continued his tour, hitting Fox, Newsmax, and fringe podcasts. But something had changed. The crowds were smaller, the applause was muted, and when he repeated the phrase, "drain the courts," a student in the back yelled, "Drain your own soul first." The clip went viral, and for the first time Miller looked rattled, because the battlefield had shifted and slogans weren't enough anymore. It came on a stormy Thursday morning, fitting given the forecast. The Southern District courtroom was packed with press, aides, law clerks, and legal observers. Trump himself did not appear, but his legal team was present, somber, shoulders tight. Judge Miriam Decker entered precisely at 9 a.m., gavel in hand. She wasted no time. After review of Exhibits 3 through 11, witness declarations, and supplemental filings, the court finds that sufficient cause exists to proceed with discovery. In full. The room held its breath. This includes, but is not limited to, deposition of relevant former executive branch officials, production of internal communications, and subpoena of scheduling and budgeting records maintained at Mar-a-Lago and affiliated legal entities. Translation: Trump's inner circle was now subject to subpoenas. His personal residence, no longer a fortress, his legal shield, officially pierced. Gasps rippled across the room. Reporters scrambled to tweet. Trump's lead counsel leaned back in his chair, eyes locked on the ceiling tiles, as if searching for a way out. But Judge Decker wasn't finished. This court also recognizes the national implications of the allegations presented. Therefore, we are formally notifying the Department of Justice for parallel review regarding potential criminal violations related to foreign entanglement and administrative abuse. The temperature in the courtroom dropped 10 degrees. Outside, it began to rain. Across the street, a protest crowd that had gathered with signs and flags fell silent as the news trickled out. The lawsuit was now a live wire, legally, politically, and globally. At the Supreme Court, Chief Justice Roberts reportedly held a private meeting with senior justices. No statement was released, but insiders described the mood in one word: grave. Within Trump's orbit, damage control was already in motion. Lawyers drafted emergency appeals. Allies floated new talking points. Overreach, political weaponization, bureaucratic mutiny. But none of it mattered, because Judge Decker's ruling wasn't just a procedural step. It was a green light for depositions, for document seizures, for exposure. And in legal terms, that green light was the beginning of a wrecking ball. Later that afternoon, Trump broke his silence on Truth Social. The post was short, in all caps. "I will not be silenced by crooked judges and traitorous staff. This is a fight for America." But the message was clear. The walls were closing in. The gloves were off. And now, the law was coming to his doorstep. The next morning, the sun rose over Washington. But the city felt colder, quieter. Mar-a-Lago's front gates remained closed. No cameras, no rants. The echo chamber had gone still. Inside courtrooms, subpoenas were already being processed. Trump's legal team filed for a partial injunction, citing executive privilege and national security immunity. The motion was denied within hours. At the Supreme Court, clerks moved briskly between chambers, eyes low, mouths shut. No one spoke publicly, but one clerk, speaking on background, said the mood was like a constitutional funeral. Overnight, editorial boards across the country issued statements. The Washington Post, a moment of reckoning. The New York Times, a republic if you can keep it under subpoena. The Wall Street Journal, a question of limits. But it wasn't until that evening, during a quiet appearance at a legal symposium at Yale, that Chief Justice John Roberts gave what many would later call the most important speech of his career. Standing before a small, silent room of law students and federal judges, he said, "The law is not a shield for the powerful. It is a guardrail for the republic. We do not bend it to accommodate charisma, wealth, or popular rage. We follow it, even when it leads us through storms." He did not name Trump. He didn't need to. The next morning, headlines simply read, "Roberts draws the line." Meanwhile, Trump supporters began to fracture. Some doubled down, holding rallies and live streams proclaiming Echo is a lie. Others quietly peeled off, donors especially. And inside Congress, a new resolution was introduced by a bipartisan coalition, the Judicial Integrity Protection Act, legislation designed to prohibit any future executive influence over judicial logistics or administration. For the first time in years, both parties were publicly aligned, not in support of one another, but in defense of the courts. Eli Walsh, for his part, gave one statement, a written letter read aloud during a press conference. "I didn't file this suit for revenge. I filed it for resilience. I believed in the rule of law once, and I refuse to believe it's dead." The words echoed online, across college campuses and inside courtroom hallways. They trended not as a meme, but as a message. The law still matters. And then came the final blow. A federal judge in the Ninth Circuit issued a ruling affirming the full scope of the Echo Protocol as a violation of judicial independence, stating, "No executive may supervise the judiciary by stealth, suggestion, or bureaucratic shell games. The court's independence is not a matter of tradition, it is a matter of survival." Trump's legal team appealed, but the tone had changed. This was no longer a debate. It was a slow-motion collapse of a strategy years in the making, unraveling one email, one deposition, one redacted memo at a time. On a quiet Friday afternoon, Donald Trump arrived at a federal courthouse for a closed-door deposition. There were no chants, no fanfare, just the soft click of a camera shutter as he stepped inside, alone, no podium, no audience, no spin, just the law, waiting.